Yeah, because I was gonna say Lord of the Rings, but I know Matt is not a big fan of the Lord of the Rings. So
No, yeah. Geez, that's a whole other episode.
that's a very
Yeah,
long episode. I
yeah.
love the Lord of the Rings movies. I have never rewatched them, but I look forward to rewatching them, especially with my kids, because
What?
it was the closest thing to me when I watched them when they came out. It was actually when I was moving to LA too. One of them, I think I went to the theater to sit on by myself to watch it.
Well,
Maybe the second or the third one, but they were the closest thing to Star Wars. Like it was like, oh wow, this is my Star Wars. Like this is what it felt like when Star Wars came out, like in the 70s. It was just so big and so well done. It's got like flaws. It's not as good as Star Wars as far as perfection, like close to perfection. The first movie, yeah, like ended on an open-ended thing, and it was a bit too long and not enough action. But the second and third movie were explosive. Like it was like Return of the Jedi and the first Star and A New Hope to me, like the second and third Star
well,
Lord of the Rings.
I mean, at least they were a fuck of a lot better than the Hobbit movies. But
Yeah, I didn't see those. I read the book. Maybe someday I'll watch the movies, but yeah.
Hold on a second. Wait,
don't.
wait.
Oh yeah.
At the
Well,
risk of this being a long thing to talk about, two things. Number one, Matt, so you do not like Lord of the Rings movies? Is that a thing?
Not particularly, no.
Wow. Okay. Shelve that. To be continued. Gil, you
Okay,
only watched Lord of the Rings once?
they're long. It's 10 hours. I mean,
okay,
when do I have the time?
What
okay.
do you mean? You make the time at least every other year or so. You
Every
have a
other year?
gigantic
Okay,
projector. You would not
Every
sat down and
5
watch
years,
these
maybe.
movies all in one day. Are you kidding me?
I'm telling you, that's why it's a problem
right.
with trilogies and stuff because they're too long. When would I
At
find
least
the
in a
All
time?
right,
weekend.
all right, Jason, I am going to give you my review of the Lord of the Rings right now, and it's going to be very compact, and it's going to piss you off,
Okay.
but I'm going to do it. The Lord of the Rings, if it weren't a fantasy movie, is a story about a person who decided to walk from Woodland Hills to Culver City, and then afterward found out, oh shit, I had a car the whole time.
That's complicated.
I can't. This is not fair because you're talking about this, and if we start going into this, then it will be like a whole episode about why the Eagles aren't as bad of a problem as you think they are. Even though I agree that they're a problem, they're not nearly as bad as you think they are, and then it would involve all sorts of stupid lore that's in Lord of the Rings and all this stuff, and of which I am not an expert. I mean, I have forgotten more about Star Wars than I will ever know about Lord of the Rings. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of unfair to bring this up now because we'll just that would take us 45 minutes minimum to talk about all that.
Yeah, no, and
All
we
right.
can make a short episode out of this, but not a 45-minute episode. But one thing I will
Yeah.
say is Matt would like this is when Colbert interviewed Peter Jackson when the Hobbit movies came out, and Colbert is a huge Lord of the Ring fans, like a Tolkien fan, and so they had a
Yikes.
blast like talking about it. So because he was like a major geek when he was a kid. So when he introduces him, my next guest is the director of the Lord of the Rings series and the new Hobbit movie that's coming out. Our interview was will span 9 hours. It will be split into like 3 different parts. Like he basically like just kind of made fun of the fact that he just splits everything into like oh that cracked me up.
I love seeing him geek out about that stuff. Like I love seeing him interview Elijah Wood and I'm so bad. What are the other two hobbits named? Dominic something or whatever.
Yeah, I think
Anyway,
like something. Yeah.
yeah. Like every time he's got them on the one of any of his shows, he does some really funny stuff with them.
Oh yeah, no, he does trivia and stuff. Like he's he knows things that Peter Jackson probably doesn't know. Like he's
Yeah,
read like
he's pretty
every
deep.
yeah, but it's But no, it is hilarious. I think he got a cameo in like The Hobbit. Like he got some sort of like role there or something, because he already befriended Peter Jackson back in the Lord of the Rings.
Oh gosh.
But no, it's that when he said that like was just so hilarious. Like because it is true. I mean, come on, The Hobbit. I read the book, and it's
Mhm.
like 250 pages or something. Like, there's no way you needed to make that into. Obviously, you can make a 250-page book into 3 movies, but not three-hour movies.
Oh no,
Like,
I think we all agree that The Hobbit was ridiculous.
maybe a two-part
Yeah.
movie or one 3-hour movie, but you do not make another 3 movies. That's
Well,
obviously a cash grab.
a-
Like,
and also like shooting it digitally at 48 frames per second, like
Horrendous.
the whole HFR 3D thing. I mean, that was just like eye bleed
yeah, if nothing
visuals. I
else,
mean, like
I
it's
left.
awful.
I lost some respect for him for sure, because I feel like maybe he got pushed by the studios because they
He
just money.
absolutely did.
Yeah, yeah, because I feel like if for artistic integrity, if you're gonna make 3 movies of 3 books that are very long, then you make one movie out of one short book. Like you
Yeah,
do,
Yeah.
you find a way to make that work. You condense the book enough so it's one cohesive 2.5 hour movie, not even 3 hours. Because then you have like a really nice saga. Because then people can watch The Hobbit and then watch the 3 movies, and you have this really nice, like the Hobbit is a setup for what's going to happen once Gandalf revisits Bilbo when he's
Yeah.
like when he's older. It's too bad. It lost like some artistic integrity. That whole thing. It's kind of like what happens when the second and third Matrix came out and like it just killed the
I've
first
been
one.
told that Ian McKellen hated shooting The Hobbit because, like, since they were using that digital crap, like he couldn't. Well, maybe it wasn't that aspect. Something about it, they couldn't do the same things they were doing on Lord of the Rings. Like he was like alone in green screen most of the time.
Yeah, I'm sure that's how people felt when they made the prequels with George Lucas, and he was like, "Yeah, we're not gonna have sets."
No, but I mean, it not just the fact that it's green screen. Like in Lord of the Rings, they were able to use the Force perspective a lot. You know,
Oh, I
but
see.
because they
Yeah,
wanted to do like 3D or something, you can't do force perspective with multiple cameras,
yeah.
because like, it's all the whole, you know about these things better than I do.
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, no, for sure. I mean,
yeah.
it's different for
Well,
sure because like it
force
changes
perspective
the focal length
relies on
and.
only having one camera lens, right? Like the
Oh
way when
yes,
you close one eye.
Yeah,
yes. I mean, to some degree, for sure. It's you do have to do it very differently.
I don't know.
So
I don't know what they were doing different. I just know that I heard he was like basically alone the whole time, rather than in the other ones they would create sets and weird things so that he could, have them just out of his eye line or something like that while he was acting.
yeah, they did some cool stuff. Like it's the Lord of the Rings, the first 3 movies, which I guess just flew way past Matt's appreciation. but but really, when you think about it, like the story of how that came about is like Peter Jackson was a horror movie director. He was like a nothing director, and he convinced like New Line Cinema to give him like what is it, $270 million to make 3 movies all together.
They
And he said
definitely
like,
put all their eggs in one basket for sure.
yeah, and they're like, no, this is gonna work. It's gonna be 3 movies. They're gonna make so much money. It could have been a train wreck. We're gonna shoot it in New Zealand. Like we're gonna have like all these and the fact that he pulled it off is one of the great cinematic miracles. That those movies could have tanked so badly. Like it could have easily gone it could have been the Hobbit way. I mean,
Oh,
even
I
though I
think it
think
would
those
have
even did.
bankrupt New Line for sure.
Yeah, like exactly. That was a huge gamble. Just as far as cinema history, this should be taught in film schools,
Of
like
course.
later on, like in years from now. Maybe now they're teaching it, but the balls that he needed to
I mean,
have.
I think if you've seen the
yeah.
Frighteners and the Feebles and Dead Alive, I think you know what kind of talent he has. But I mean, you know, like I
I,
wouldn't have trusted him with it.
for the record, I mean, I'm not denying that the Lord of the Rings movies are an incredible accomplishment. I just don't like them.
Yeah.
Well,
I-
where
I
would you put them
mean-
on on your top 5 or top 10 fantasy movies that are live action and not Disney?
Okay. Fantasy movies. Okay, yeah, they're probably in the top 10.
Okay.
I'm
That's fair.
I'm trying to examine my history with
You just
fantasy
don't
movies.
like a lot of fantasy movies. Yeah.
No, I don't like fantasy movies. I just generally don't like fantasy movies.
Yeah. What are some good ones? There's a
I put
few
not in
good
this
ones.
order, but I put Lord of the Rings, Pan's Labyrinth, Princess Bride, Stardust,
Yeah.
The Fall, City of Lost Children.
Yeah.
I like Big Fish, but I don't think it's nearly as good as those 5 I just mentioned.
Yeah, Big Fish. I mean, in Tim Burton in general, there's a few. I mean, Edward Scissorhands.
Oh, pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
love Edward Scissorhands. And there's a few other ones.
The
But
question is, where do you draw the line? Like, I mean, I think most people would consider like the old Harryhausen movies to be fantasy, like Jason and the Argonauts and Sinbad. I thought those were really good, but a lot of people would just think of those as like an adventure movie. I guess they're fantasy.
it's a yeah, adventure fantasy. I mean, those are the blueprint. A lot of people like cite those as like their inspiration for the modern fantasy
But would you
movie.
consider King Kong a fantasy movie?
No, that's different.
That's more adventure, right? Like, because there's no magic in it. It's just they found an island that still had
I mean,
dinosaurs
it
and
is
giant
still like
apes.
a Godzilla type of story because it's like an ape that's not supposed to be
Yeah, it's
supposed to
more of a
exist.
monster movie, really, than fantasy.
Yeah. Well, for example, I recently watched the original Westworld, and I guess
Oh,
that's more science
I
fiction.
totally want to watch. I've got that on my queue.
It is a funny movie to
It's
watch, especially if you've watched the show
yeah.
itself, because it's not nearly as good, but
No
you see
spoilers.
the seeds, and it's Michael Crichton, like I think he wrote the script and directed it, which is such a
Yeah.
weird thing because then he
Yes, he
became an
did.
author. Yeah, it's such a weird. So you see the seeds of like also Jurassic Park there and stuff, like how he was
Yeah.
thinking. He just did it with humans, or for with robots, but
Right.
robots run amok. But yeah, it's like it's interesting. Some sci-fi concepts and fantasy concepts are just very unique and interesting. Yeah, but I guess it's tough. There's not a lot of movies. There's more shows now. Neil Gaiman, I mean, he's like been having a decade lately. I mean, they made a show
Yeah.
of Good Omens. They made a show of I guess the show about American Gods hasn't been as successful as people had hoped. I
They still
love
made
that
it
book.
though.
They made it, and I really hope that there's a movie out there that could be made. Like it might need to be a trilogy of movies or something, but it's a really good story, and it's a very mature story, mature fantasy. But maybe I don't know, maybe it's not in the cards. But yeah, fantasy. I mean, science fiction is definitely exploded in recent times, and to some degree, fantasy too, because of Marvel. And I mean, what do you that is fantasy technically? Superheroes are fantasy.
Eh,
Um, they're not
maybe.
science fiction.
Yeah.
I mean, Star Wars to me,
I
by the
try to
way,
hold
the great
comic
debate.
book
Star
superhero
Wars to me
movies
is
in a
fantasy.
separate subgenre.
Like I've never considered Star Wars science fiction. I've always considered Star Wars fantasy.
Oh, that's a
It's
whole
Yeah.
nother discussion.
That's a whole other discussion, but technically it's more of a fantasy movie than science fiction. Like Star Wars
Space
is not
opera.
2001 Space Odyssey. Those are two different
Right.
genres
No,
completely.
yeah, that's where I'm going to stand with Gil. I mean,
I
yeah,
remember we
Star.
had this conversation at like
Yeah.
4 in the morning one time, and we were all slightly inebriated. But yeah, the whole like, yeah, I know. I remember I remember Gil saying something that blew my mind, and I was like, oh wow, yeah, that's different. That's a different way of looking at what is science fiction and what is not. But yeah, I mean yeah.
Yeah, I mean the easiest comparison is Star Trek versus Star Wars. Star Trek is obviously science fiction. Star Wars is, if anything, Star Trek might be science eventuality type of thing, but
Eh.
but Star Wars is definitely fantasy. on the spectrum. I guess there's a spectrum.
I would argue
Yeah,
that Star Trek is more like strives to be science fiction, but good episodes and good movies might accomplish being science fiction. The lesser ones, I don't even know if I mean, when you've got writers of some of these episodes and they're just like, all right, here's what happens, and they leave a bunch of blanks, and all the blanks are like, fill that in with a sciencey sounding word. Okay, quantum. Okay, particles. Okay, that one's gonna be something rather, and it's like every single thing is that you can just see. Oh, okay, what did they do? They're gonna use the big round thing on the front of the ship to get them out of this problem. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, a lot of it's real weak, and whatever. I would say it strives to be science fiction.
Well, I'm going to say that Star
Some
Trek
hate
was Star Trek was science fiction before J.J. Abrams, Kurtzman, and Orsi decided to rape it.
Yeah.
That's probably fair.
I,
Wait, Matt, I have to ask you this. Matt,
yeah, okay.
Who raped who worse? The list of people you just said with Star Trek, or Spielberg and Lucas with Indiana Jones 4?
I had a feeling you were going there.
Yeah.
The moment I heard the
Easily-
word
when he
rape,
said it, I got the picture of the South Park episode with
Oh no,
Indiana
yeah,
Jones
with the
bent
word
over the
rape,
table
I was
shit.
already there. Yeah,
Yeah.
if you're gonna rape a movie, there's only one scene to think about, and it's the South
No.
Park.
Yeah, no, easily Abrams, Kurtzman, and Orsi. I mean, they took a franchise that's 57 years old and turned it into complete shit in like with a snap of a finger. Like they just got the money and said, "Hey, screw it. We're just going to retcon everything and turn this into a steaming pile of shit. We're going to tell you that everything that you've watched since the 1960s is irrelevant now because we're going to change the entire timeline. We're going to change everything that these characters are. We're going to change everything that you've ever learned about this universe, and we're going to give you a major fucking middle finger and just say, ha, now we've got the power. So shut the fuck up, and we're going to show you this. We're going to show you this bullshit. Yeah, no, I mean,
Sounds a little bit like the mouse in Star Wars.
I
The mouse?
Disney.
Oh, the mouse in Star Wars.
yeah.
No,
Yes,
not the
but
mouse
I would
in Star
also
Wars. The mouse and
the mouse
the Star Wars franchise.
and the Star Wars. Oh yes. But I would also say you can say the same thing about Lucas and the prequels and the animated show that came after the prequels. Lucas
I
has
don't know
this
about
thing.
that.
He often defended the prequels by saying, like, you know what? But today's kids, they really got into the prequels more so than the adults that grew up on the original Star Wars. And I always thought, like, yeah, but that's not an excuse. Like I do feel like that the kids of that generation, they're actually like almost toddler age. I feel like the prequels, they really did. I feel like Star Wars, when it first came out, didn't only appeal to kids; it appealed to young adults. Where the prequels almost exclusively really engaged kids, not really the young adults. That's where the difference is. So you've still changed what Star Wars was. It's not okay as long as some people like it in a different age group. Same thing with Star Trek. If now the Star Trek universe is action movie fans and action TV show fans, or science fiction fans, but not smart science fiction fans, you've changed you've changed the audience. Like you've basically it's a different audience, and you've done that because you want to bring along the diehard fan and add more fans, basically, especially in the Star Trek situation. So just admit that you've changed what it is to make it a wider appeal, and we'll call it a day, and then we can choose whether to watch it or not. But that's what it is.
It is one of those things where, I do follow a few of the Star Trek pages on social media, and I am going to be as condescending as humanly possible here, but if you read the Star Trek pages on social media, it's like reading Flowers for Algernon backward. after J.J. Abrams took over. Basically, okay, Star Trek
I
before
think you
J.J.
said it all right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. As long as if you know Flowers for Algernon.
Who doesn't know Flowers for Algernon? That's like sixth
I don't
grade.
know. That's true.
Like-
Yeah, no, it is. We also
like
read
Animal
it even
Farm.
in Israel. So yeah.
Right.
But yeah.
I can't even begin to comment on everything you guys just said. If we start talking about the Star Wars prequels, and we'll be
It'll
here
go on.
past midnight. I can't.
Yeah. No, we should definitely wrap it up. But one thing
Yeah.
I will say is, like, back when who's his face? The last person to really run a Star Trek show really well, Ronald D. Moore. Like he said, when he was a young writer, like up and coming in like the Next Generation show, and back when Roddenberry was alive, I think he was there when Roddenberry was alive, and he said they would write scripts in the writers' room, and they would go to Roddenberry and they would pitch the episode to him, and this is one of the best like stories ever about Roddenberry. Is he told him, so what's the episode about? Well, this happens and this happens and then that happens. Like, no, that's the plot. What is it about? And that's it.
Yeah.
That's all he needed to tell him. Like, we're telling stories that have something to say. We're not just telling stories for the sake of telling stories. J.J. Abrams, mostly, I think there's some inkling of substance in his movies. There's emotions of humans, and you can relate to them. But as far as saying something, as far as trying to get to something, a truth about humanity, or that's just not there. And that was even lost when what's his name, Braga, or like who came right after Ronald D. Moore, but really he took like even TNG like in the later seasons and kind of like already went there. He went the JJ route and made it all about fancy science fiction stuff without actual substance. But Ronald D. Moore and of course the people that came before, like that, they really got it. They just got it, and they did it really well on Deep Space Nine, on obviously TNG, some on Voyager, but Voyager is when I think Braga took over, and it just was less and less of that.
Brendan Braga was definitely instrumental in the whole gimmicky portion of Star Trek, and I've been saying it for years that Star Trek is basically the Bible for atheists. You have parables, you have moral stories. It's a discovery process, and that's why Star Trek Discovery is so bad, because it's not a discovery process. I mean, it's supposed to be a series of parables. And Star Trek Deep Space Nine kind of deviated in that it did have a multi-seasonal arc and a storyline, but still within that, they had episodes like, The Pale Moonlight, and
The trouble with crossover.
That too. But they had those episodes that really dealt with real moral questions and real moral conflicts, and you could watch those episodes one off and get the message without having the entire context. And that's something that Star Trek has lost. And
That's
you
the reason
know,
the Orville is better.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. I need to watch the Orville. That's my next thing. I'm like one episode away from finishing the Underground Railroad, and then I'll start the
Okay.
Orville.